Welcome to The Details with Elliott, Connie, and Adam Frower. This is a podcast where we examine the intersection between solution-focused brief therapy and current topics going on in the world. And we do this because we genuinely want the world to be a better place. So enjoy and come examine the details with us. So Adam, let's talk a bit about unity today. And one of the things that is on my mind about unity and why I think it's such a cool topic or important topic, I shouldn't say cool actually, but important topic for us to talk about today is kind of what's going on in the world. And I'm going to start talking politically because I've been seeing a lot of stuff, a lot of different level politicians saying the Democrats are angry and we should be focused on unity. And it's really frustrating to me because one of the things that's really important is if you do something harmful to me, like try to murder me in an insurrection attempt, a reasonable response would be anger. The American very popular politician, polarizing but popular, is who we call AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she's angry and people are saying what you're saying, it's divisive and it's not about unity. But if you've done something harmful to me, you need to acknowledge the harmful thing you did was not about unity and produced anger in me, which was a reasonable response. And you and I have lived through this. I can remember there are people in the solution-focused community that treated me really, really poorly, including a woman by the name of Tharana Nelson, who worked really, really hard to have a negative impact on my career. And me being who I am, I wanted to resolve that issue. And we had a conversation. Adam, you were on the conversation. We had a conversation with her. Didn't go super well. And I just thought okay, so that'll be that. Some years later, I walk into a conference. I go through the hallway of the conference. There's Tharana. I'm done with her, and I'm assuming she's done with me. So I walk past her. I don't say hello. And she gets mad at me about that and tells, one of my friends that she's mad at me about that, says she wants to talk to me. And we were on the phone. I told her, you did some really bad things. And she said, well, it sounds like you're still upset. You're just not ready to have this conversation. And I was like, no, I am upset. That's exactly why I'm ready to have this conversation. And to be clear, I wasn't upset yelling at her and swearing and, calling her names or anything like that. I was just voicing my displeasure with her behavior over the course of the previous decade. This wasn't one incident of something bad she said once or whatever. This was poor treatment over the course of a decade of her abusing her role of power as a board member of a prominent organization in our field. So yeah, I was angry about her conduct and capable of confronting her and telling her about my anger of that conduct. And I remember on that conversation, she said, you're still angry and it sounds like you're not ready to unify. I was no, I am ready to unify, but unification requires you own your stuff. In order to unify, you have to acknowledge your role. You can't just say, I'm going to punch you in the face. And if you say, ouch, that's a divisive statement, let alone me punching you back, but I'm going to punch you in the face. And your ouch cry of being punched in the face is you being divisive. And you have to acknowledge that if I punch you in the face, I now owe you an apology. If I punch you in the face, I did something that would reasonably produce an ouch response. And I now have to say sorry. I now have something that I have to remedy in order for unification to take place. So when I watch what's going on in politics, in American politics in particular, there's a lot of stuff that has happened to groups of people, women and people of color. And now a Democrat is in office and the Democrats have taken over power. They've taken over the majority of the Senate. So now the Republicans are saying we need to focus on unity. Well, that starts with you acknowledging you've done some harsh, difficult things.
One of the things about the idea, the concept of unity, inherent in unity is also difference. One of the purposes of calling for unity is to bring our differences together, to unify differences. And so I think one of the things that I would want to talk about off the top is that unity doesn't mean that everyone is the same, or that everyone thinks the same, or that everyone believes the same thing. But in some sense, and I think we've hit on this a couple of times before, we are stronger, we are better because of our differences. If we were exactly the same, if we thought the same, if we had the same strengths, if we had the same skills, if we had the same abilities, then we would be strong in certain areas, but we would completely be lacking in other areas. And so one of the things I think that's so magical about what you and I do is that your strengths are different strengths than mine, and my strengths are different strengths than yours. And when we unify, when you and I come together and we make a unit, we are better because now we have a multitude of strengths. We cover each other when we're weak in certain areas. And so I think that's something really important to talk about as far as unity is unity doesn't mean the same. I think the other thing in what you were saying that's important is unity means we may need to reconcile. And when I've done something hurtful to you, the barrier of unity is mine. That I have put a barrier between me and you because of the things that I've done. It's my responsibility then to remove the barrier if unity is going to happen. And in this case, and one of the things that you're talking about is oftentimes what's required is an apology, a sincere apology, but also rectifying the situation in some sense, right? Making it right. And I think the onus for that isn't on the person who is hurt or injured. The onus to remove that barrier is on the person who has done the hurting. And so I think you're right. I think that when somebody, especially somebody who's in the position of power, says you need to get over it or you need to forget about it, if you would just come over here, we could be unified. But I think that shifts the responsibility to the wrong party. And then the final thing that I wanted to say about what you just mentioned is oftentimes, I think what happens when those barriers get put in place and there's a division rather than unity, I think oftentimes both parties are afraid. They're afraid of what might happen if we take that barrier out, or they're afraid to make themselves vulnerable to try to take that barrier out. Oftentimes, both people are looking at the person on the other side and saying, if you would make the first move, then I would know it was safe. I think one of the things that we have to do in order to become unified is we each need to take stock of what can I do to be the first person to begin this process. And I don't want to shift blame to the person who's been hurt, right? So I'm not saying if you've been hurt, you have to take the first step in order to rectify that. But one of the things that can happen is to say, I'm willing to have this conversation. I'm upset about it, but I'm willing to have this conversation. That's taking a first step and putting things in place where you say, it sounds like you're angry, so you're not open to this. That isn't taking a first step. That isn't being vulnerable. That isn't reciprocating that vulnerability. We can't confuse flat affect with unity. We can be unified and disagree. We can be unified and have feelings that are strong. Difference is a part of unity.
So two things go through my mind, Adam, as I sit and listen to you talk about this particular topic. And the first one is I remember in graduate school, and I wish if I knew this was going to come into my mind, I would have had this reference point ready, but I can't remember the study. But there was a study, and I remember taking this in like my ethics class, as a graduate student. There was a study done that found there was a drastic, significant drop in malpractice lawsuits in the helping professions when the clinician said, I'm sorry. Like a genuine, sincere apology led to a significant, drastic drop in number of malpractice lawsuits. So think about that for a second. Like, imagine if there's been some sort of a rupture that makes unity difficult. Imagine the impact and power of simply saying, I'm sorry. Because I'm sorry, like a genuine apology communicates two really powerful things. First thing is it communicates, I acknowledge your reality is your truth. Second thing, it acknowledges I have remorse of my role in that reality you experienced. And those two things are wildly powerful. Like, had the person I talked about earlier done that, we would not still be sitting here with this issue. And I've moved on, like my life has moved on. I now sit on the very board that she sat on when she was using her power to abuse people. So like life has moved on. That's fine. It's great. But I think it is sincere to acknowledge when there's a rupture, if you are able to say, I'm sorry, it communicates, I acknowledge your reality, and I'm also expressing remorse for my role in that reality. I think if you want to have unity, then you have to have that in place. I think that must be part of it. And I think the other thing you touched on that I'm just going to amplify that is so important is you and I have been working together for a decade. If someone were to ask me, how would you describe that relationship you have with Adam? I would describe it as unified. If you ask me, like, if someone were to ask me, how did we do it? I would say through respectful acceptance, because we are not the same person. I almost, as I'm sitting here, Adam, it's almost funny to me because I don't actually think we have a lot in common, strangely enough. But what I think we do really well that has led to magic, I actually describe the process of working with you and the way that we work as magic. And what we have is somehow we have the ability to completely respect one another. And over time, we've learned to lean on one another. So I know I don't even have to worry about the things that I'm not good at. Adam takes that ball and runs with it. Like the stuff that I'm not good at, that falls on his desk and he kills it. And Adam doesn't have to worry about the stuff that he's not good at because that falls on my desk and I go at it and I kill it. Unification does not mean agreement. I don't have to figure out how to be more like Adam, and Adam doesn't have to figure out how to be more like me. What I have to figure out is how do I fully accept who Adam is and make sure that I communicate to Adam respect and even admiration in those differences, as opposed to judgment and criticism in those differences. Every single day of my working relationship with you, I've been aware of our differences, but I have felt respected by them. I remember I used to say to you, Adam, I feel like I have these weird skills and I feel like everybody in the field hates me for it, but you like me for it. And it's that, I think, is what leads to unity, because what you did was like, I'm going to fully accept Elliott does these things really well. And I'm going to make sure he feels respected, even admired for it. And I hope that you have felt the exact same.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were talking, I was just thinking about the conversation we had a few days ago. We're planning this trip that we're leaving on soon. And I said, okay, we got to write down all this stuff that we got to do. And you were like, I hate planning. And then it was like you had this realization, like after a decade, and you said, but I can finally appreciate being surrounded by planners. I think that's what we have learned over time, is that you have grasped that there are benefits to planning. So you'll engage in the activity because you know it pays off, but you know that that's something that I'm good at. On the flip side, I have learned to appreciate flexibility and creativity don't happen necessarily in a plan. And so I'll put the plan together, and if we deviate from the plan, I'll readjust it, right? And I think over time, we have figured out that we need both of those. We need a plan, but we need to be flexible with the plan. And I think that acceptance, and I would even go a step further, and I would say that appreciation of difference, I think it makes what we do so much better, that we give it some forethought but we're also able in the moment to adjust. It's almost like we can finish each other's sentences because we now have done this so much that we know the routine so well that when it changes, we understand why it's changing. That's what real unity looks like, is we have done this so much that if it changes, we know exactly what to do when it changes.
And the other word I would add in there is trust, because I know when Adam calls me and he says, hey, we got this trip coming, because we have a mega trip coming. And he's like, I need to ask some questions because we have to put a plan together. I trust. I would never do that. If I were going on this trip by myself, I would just get in a car. I would make 2 or 3 sandwiches and I would make sure I had gas money and I'd be gone. I have to trust that, like, if Adam wants to make a plan, it's going to end up making the end product better. And on the flip side, like, you have to trust if in the middle of a plan, I'm like, ooh, let's go over here, it's going to end up making the end product better. I feel like we could go to Washington, D.C., right? And you go into one room with one group of politicians and I go in the other room with the other group of politicians, and we could tell them how to do it. And we wouldn't be telling them how to agree, but like we would be telling them how to unify. And I think of that I heard a quote, I think it's actually a Native American quote, that we're both wings on the same bird.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're not different. We just have a difference in how we think we should do things. But that's totally fine. Like, you and I have differences on how we think we should do things. But we've come to a point where I not only do I appreciate, but I admire those differences in you. Like, some of those things, Adam, I look up to you for them. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just wish I was like that. And I'm so glad that he's my friend. And I'm so glad that he's willing to use those resources to make my life better. And it makes me want to use my resources to make yours better. You know what I mean? Like, that's the other cool thing about unifying, is it turns into a reciprocal relationship where I really feel so fortunate that you bring your different skill set into my life and have made my life better. And as a consequence, I actively work to use my skill set to make your life better. And it has produced magic in both of our lives, in our families' lives even. My mom considers you like a son to her. Like, you met my mom for the first time in Chicago. That must have been the summer, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Every single time I've talked to my Adam since, she says, how's your friend Adam doing? Tell him I love him. My mom says that every time I talk to her. My aunt like, you are like part of the family. And I think the way that happened was my family knows, like, this guy is using his different and unique skill set to make Elliott's life better. How could we not love, appreciate, and accept him into our group? And the same thing in your family. Like, your kids call me Uncle Elliott. I mean, it's amazing, Adam. It's amazing. I feel like not everybody in the world, certainly not everybody in Washington, D.C., understands the power and importance of unity.
As you were talking to, I was thinking about our work, as psychotherapists. And I think I was having a conversation with somebody. Somebody called me the other day and they said, hey, I have a really, really difficult case. And she was describing to me a relationship between a mom and a daughter. The dad, or the husband, had been tragically killed. And so the mom was really concerned about what impact this would have on the daughter. And the daughter seemed to be managing okay. But one of the things that came up is that really what both people were saying in this relationship, they were saying, we're really struggling in our relationship because I just want to be heard, right? The daughter is saying, I want my mom to accept me for who I am. And the mom was saying, I just want the daughter to engage in our family. And I think that dynamic is so common in families. And one of the things that we talked about as we were talking about what do you do in a situation like this, is that I said, what are they really trying to say to each other? And the therapist was thinking about it and she said, I think really what they're saying is, I want you to be a part of my life because I love you. And I want you to love me, and I want you to respect who I am. And I think they're trying to say that in such different ways, right? The mom is saying, come out of your room and come and do these things with us that we want you to do. And the daughter is saying, can't I just be in here by myself because I really like it in here? It's quiet and it's calm and I like it in here. Can't you just accept me? And I think oftentimes we forget when disagreements come up or when arguments come up that really we love each other. And we're trying to communicate to each other, hey, I love you. I want you to be with me. I want you to be like me. But we do it in a way that's different than what they want or what they need. And I think sometimes what unity requires is that we just take a step back and we say, how do I show you love in the way you need to be loved, not in the way that I want you to love me? And so I think unity too is just the complete respect of what the other person needs. We try to meet their needs in the way that they need them.
You know, I think about that, Adam, and it's like this metaphor is overused, so I hate that I'm about to say it, but it's like the building of bridges, I think. And I think we have to engage in being bridge builders. I think we have to understand, in order for me to build a bridge from the land of Elliott Connie to the land of Adam Frower, it doesn't matter what they believe in the land of Adam Frower. We just have to build the bridge, and we have to meet, and we have to accept, and we have to appreciate. And I think that's just when true magic happens. I cannot stress it enough. I hope that our relationship and our story and our journey can be like a inspiration to people, or even a guide. I'm trying to make this really, really clear. If someone from my background can be friends with someone like you, but it goes beyond that. If someone from my background, if my mother and my family can totally bring you and your family into ours to the point where there is no discernible difference. My family happens to live in Chicago. And when we go to Chicago, Adam is welcome at every meal post-COVID, but Adam is welcome in every familial experience. And there is no notification of difference. It's only love and acceptance. And the same thing is true around your family. There is no difference. And if we could do that, and again, it's not just if these two guys that are different can become friends, but it's almost like if these two guys whose different worlds can become one world. That's what I want people to understand. I mean, can you imagine, Adam, if all of the American politicians started treating each other like Americans? Because that's what's happened. My family doesn't treat you like that white family over there, and your family doesn't treat me like that black family over there. We've taken these two worlds that on the surface have nothing in common and have never touched before. And now they're completely incorporated in one world. And it's remarkable. And it's the one thing I want everybody to know.
The image that came to my mind as you were talking is strange because it's completely unrelated to what you were talking about. But it was the idea of molecules, right? Water molecules are made up of 2 hydrogen molecules and an oxygen. They have nothing in common. If you look at them, they do totally different things, right? But it's when they come together, they make an entity that's vastly different again. But it's an entity that is life-giving. It's an entity that is life-sustaining. That if either one of those pieces was missing, we would no longer have life. And I think it's the same with us. We're not asking either person to change. We're just saying, bring your entity and I'll bring my entity, and together we'll make something totally different. And I think that's the essence of unity, is like you mentioned, your family has taken me in and my family has taken you in. The entities haven't changed. Your family is still your family. They act like their family. My family is still my family. We act like my family, but we feel comfortable with the other part because we're unified.
What is something, Adam, we can ask listeners to do to increase unification in their life?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think one of the things that comes to my mind is to think of a person, to think of somebody who's potentially even vastly different than you, that maybe you've had a disagreement with before or whatever, and take time beforehand, I would say, to think about what you appreciate about that person, despite all the differences. What could you possibly look at and appreciate? What could you say, if I had more of that in my life, I would be better? After taking that time to appreciate, if it's appropriate, I would say, go tell that person. Go tell that person what you appreciate about them with no expectation of reciprocation. Just go tell them what you appreciate, and that inherently will bring about more unity.
Adam, I think that's amazing. I think that's perfect.